Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. It means a lot. Let's go back to Romans chapter 12 this morning. These little verses down through this chapter, some of them, I guess all of them really, you could talk about them for longer than the time allowed, but these are helpful little verses to study. And this morning we're gonna cover Romans 12 verse 15 and 16. So starting there in verse number 15. Let me back up. I do want to just back up and read verse number 10. As we go through these and it's stretching out over time, you forget the context a little bit of what these are all, where the head of it all is. But in verse number 10 it says, "Be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love, in honor preferring one another." And we talked about that some weeks ago. But in verse number 15 it says this, "Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep." Verse 16, "Be of the same mind one toward another. Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceits." There's a bunch of stuff there. So just want to start out and we'll just work our way through it. As Brother Red says, we just graze through it. So why would Paul feel that he needed to tell us specifically to rejoice with them and to weep with them? Well, first of all, there's not many people doing much rejoicing anymore. There's a difference between just being excited or being happy about something. I mean, every year about this time, I start thinking about a certain place. And if it becomes a possibility on my radar, I'm talking about the mountains, okay? If you don't know. If it becomes a possibility on my radar to maybe be able to go, I start to get happy about it. And then when I know for sure we're going to go and we've made the reservations at the cabin and all that, so I mean, then it's like, it can't get here fast enough. But that's not necessarily rejoicing. It makes me happy, and I get excited about it. But I get excited about, if I know we're having a good meal at home too. So I don't do a lot of rejoicing over that. There's a difference between being happy or even being excited about something versus something that makes your heart rejoice. And when you look around at everyone these days, there's not, even amongst ourselves, there's not a lot of rejoicing that goes on. The Bible says, "Rejoice in the Lord always." Well, that's about the only thing that you and I know of that ain't never going to change. If anything, it's only just going to get better. Everything else in this world is not that way. And life is just one long, tragic series of tragic events. Like I heard somebody say one time, their life is like one big tragic cartoon. And I've said this in weeks past here, but man, we all have things that we can become fixated on that are negative, like all the negative things. So there's always something breaking or something that needs worked on or something that needs fixed or something that don't work out or a plan that falls through or all that kind of stuff. And we get in the habit of only being focused on that, mainly because it's just, you feel like you're trying to put a fire out all the time, just fixing the things that seem to not work out. But it's important to recenter often and remember what's most important and what our end goal here is. I heard a guy say that this week. He was talking to some fella, and the guy was like, talking about his education and going to school and his majors and all this kind of stuff. And he said, "Well, what's your end goal though with all of this?" And the guy could not give him an answer because he just hadn't thought about that. He's like, "Well, what are you focused on?" He said, "Well, I guess honestly, just the having fun doing it." He's like, "Yeah, but it's going to come to an end one of these days." Well, he just hadn't thought about that. What in the world? And that's something I feel like that many of us don't consider is the end goal. Like, what are we doing any of this for? What's your life about? Well, when you're young, and it's funny because I feel like we've turned a little bit of a corner and I see things from a different perspective in some ways. And, the kids, when they're little, you're just trying, I've said it before, you're just trying to keep them from dying. They're just always trying to eat something we were walking around outside with the grandkids the other day. And I looked down and Millie had something in her mouth. I said, Kim, what's she chewing on? And it was a cap off of an acorn. Well, nobody's seen her pick it up. But it had been in her mouth for a while. Well, one wrong breath, and that thing sucked down her windpipe, and we have a choking child. Well, why would you put that in your mouth? Well, because they just do. And it just feels like it's just like a hamster wheel that you're on of just trying to keep them alive. And happy, and not crying, and not hurting, and sleeping regular, and eating right, and all, so you're just grinding, man, just grinding at it. And then all of a sudden, one day, they all get in the car and leave. And if the end goal was just to do the task for that day, well, then what happens when the scenery changes? Because it changes quick. So there has to be a longer look to everything. Rejoicing, we're talking about rejoicing. You have to have something to rejoice for, hoping, rejoicing in hope. There's a scripture, I think we read that a few weeks ago when we was talking about hope. Rejoice in hope. Well, what do you mean? Well, already start preparing your heart to be thankful and rejoicing in mission accomplished before it comes. That's what hope is. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. Well, if all you ever do is focus on how bad everything is and you don't even want to do nothing because it'll probably go wrong, then you ain't never going to have anything to be happy about, would you? Not very many people do much rejoicing. So that's why it says, rejoice with them that do rejoice. Weep with them that weep. Very seldom do people do that for one another anymore. Either one, rejoice with them or weep with them. In this world of connectivity, we've become so much more isolated than we once were from each other. We don't know about what goes on in each other's lives, and so how would you weep for somebody when they're weeping if you don't even know what's going on in their life? And it sounds like I'm saying that in a way, and I've said it before, and I thought about this. I said, man, I don't want to make it sound like I'm just like, nobody wants anybody to know their business. People don't want to burden others with their problems. I feel like everybody focuses so much on the fact that, everybody's got problems. And I don't want to come and dump all my problems on you because I know you're struggling too. But to rejoice or weep with each other is part of being kindly affectioned. How is there going to be affection for each other, kind affection for each other, unless we can not only be able to do this with each other, but want to, people that struggle with things, and listen, I'll get to that, when someone's rejoicing over something, this is a trap that we fall into. It's part of the habit of isolation and cloisterism, if you will, just me and mine and staying hermetized, so to speak, emotionally, mostly. But a lot of times when someone's rejoicing over something, there'll always be someone who will condemn or even mock their rejoicing. See somebody, and I remember a time when people stood up in church and thanked the Lord for every little thing that happened. It was common. And now when someone says, hey, I just want to say something, I want to thank the Lord for keeping us safe this week. We, had a little thing or whatever. And other people will think, well, that ain't that big a deal. You should have followed me around this week. You know what I mean? That kind of cynical attitude towards rejoicing or someone else's rejoicing. It's part of what makes people not openly rejoice or share why they're rejoicing with their brothers and sisters or even their family. It's amazing to me how family anymore is so divided and isolated from each other even when they're together a lot. And it's not so much even the matter of what I said before about, I just don't want to burden them with my burden. No, there's been a negative response to something. Same goes for weeping. The old eye roll response, like, oh, brother, here we go. Yeah, it ain't that big a deal. Why are you, somebody that's weeping, why would someone weep? I mean, look, weeping is an overflow of emotion. It's an emotion. And weeping is one of those things that happens when the emotion gets too big. And it can be over something joyful. But the weeping he's referring to here is not rejoicing. It's weeping over something sorrowful. Loss, grief, disappointment, sadness. Weeping with those that weep. There's it gets labeled as drama. Oh boy, here she goes, being dramatic again, crying over everything and wanting more attention and all this kinds of. It gets labeled a lot of things, and it's part of the reason why we don't share. We don't share. We just keep it to ourselves. We bear our burdens quietly, or we protect our rejoicing quietly because we don't want it to be rended in some way. There's people that I feel like they've made it their personal life's mission to just see if they can make you feel dumb for weeping or take away your joy from your rejoicing. Even if they don't do it on purpose, they want to point out, they feel like they're doing you a favor to try to help you not set yourself up for disappointment by trying to steal your joy. I know a guy, and that's one of his favorite sayings. Don't let it steal your joy. But there's a lot of things that steal our joy. And sometimes it's each other. So that's why he would address this about rejoice with them that rejoice, that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep. He didn't ask us to assess every situation and circumstance and then decide whether their rejoicing or weeping passes muster or passes inspection, or I guess that's worth rejoicing over. All right, well, woohoo, good for you. We're happy for you. Or to just like roll your eyes and walk away and be like, oh, okay. Your lawnmower started when you cranked it this summer. Well, you ever went out for the first mowing dreading it already because you know it ain't going to start? And then you turn the key and everything works. You're like, well, hallelujah. That's happened to me for 2 years in a row. Can you believe that? There was a small amount of rejoicing that went on in the garage on the lawnmower when that happened. Little thing, yeah. But, all good things come down from the Father of lights. Is that a good thing? Well, of course it's a good thing. Rejoice in the Lord always. When did we get to where we decided what wasn't worth rejoicing about? You ever think about that? Well, it comes from abundance and excess. It does. We shouldn't, he didn't tell us, like I said, to assess every situation and then decide whether it was worth rejoicing or not by us, the authority about everything, enough to justify and merit us gracing them with our participation in their rejoicing. That's not what he's telling. He's telling us not to do that. Rejoicing and weeping are both outward manifestations of the overflow of specific emotions, gladness and sorrow. If you will fully choose to not join with someone in these, then every action that you take after that is an outward manifestation of the overflow of the emotions that you are allowing to control you. Whether that emotion, if you look at somebody that's grieving, there was people there yesterday that were having a hard time. Had a lady call me this week. She said, I got a piece of facial metal blowed off my house. Can you come fix it? So I said, yeah, all right. So I just ran out there and I got there and she told me, she said, I lost my husband 2 weeks ago. He'd been on hospice for 5 months, laying in a bed in the living room, and she's just a little old lady. Still trying to figure out how to even go about a day, kind of with no direction. And then she was just walking around the outside because she was tired of sitting on the porch, and found this piece of metal blowed off. And she said, I don't even know how long it's been that way. She said, I ain't been out here in months. She's been tending to him. And she was just like right on the edge of weeping the whole time. And I don't know. I sympathized for her. You know, I heard a man one time tell another man that had lost a family member. And I heard him, he hugged him and he said, listen, I'm sorry. He said, I grieve with you. And I thought, that sounds almost like something out of a play or something, but at the same time, that's a good way to express to someone else that you're feeling what they're feeling. I grieve with you. You know, that's a little more personal than condolences. No, I grieve with you. Yeah. And I don't know, as Christians, there ought to be a different spirit in us that is bent that way to want to empathize with other people, you know, to want to feel their joy, their sorrow, you know. Why? Well, because you can help them. And, you know, you can't take away someone's grief. But it's like I told that lady, I said, do you have many friends? She said, I have a few. I said, then lean on them. That's what friends are for. I said, I know you probably feel like being alone right now. But I said, there'll come a day where you ought to go spend some time with your friends. And don't let it just overtake you. I said, you know, I gave her my number and I said, if you need anything, you holler at me. And I said, it ain't even got to be work. I'll come help you, you know, move your table or clean your fridge out or whatever you need. And I don't know, it's so foreign to people to hear someone offer something that ain't for hire in matters like this, you know. And it ought to be that's part of our testimony. I mean, it's part of our reputation as Christians. And then you ever ask yourself why people have such a low opinion of Christianity anymore? Well, it's because it ain't very nice. People just ain't very nice. And so, if that's not what's coming out of you, then whatever is coming out of you is not rejoicing and weeping. Okay, the mere sight of anyone, but especially someone you love, rejoicing or weeping, ought to invoke an immediate response of the same emotions you see in them, if nothing more than from a place of concern or sympathy. And maybe it's not to be an outbursting visual manifestation at first. I mean, I'm not advocating for if you see someone crying, you just start crying too. Oh, and start. I'm not talking about, you know. You see that in little children because they've not learned how to control emotions yet. They'll cry because they see someone crying. They don't know why. They're just, it's disturbing, it's frightening. They don't know how to process it. But we do. I mean, read the room. You ever heard that expression? Well, a lot of people live in their own self so much anymore, they do not do that. Now, I'm not talking about just, you know, making matters worse by adding to the chaotic, emotional part of someone going through something joyful or not. But our heart toward others should be to immediately want to relate to them and then to share in their joy or their sadness. And that's what being of the same mind is. It's not something that you can just quietly assume or claim that you are. Yeah, we're of the same mind. Well, how do I know? I don't have a clue what you did this week or what's happened to you this week or vice versa. We don't. And so for us to be of the same mind, that has to be a part of our life. Is it easy? Well, no. Otherwise, we'd all be doing it just like we get up and eat breakfast every morning or wash the clothes or go to work. But we don't, because it's not. It requires a certain element of sacrifice on our part to involve other people in our life that way. There's a certain element of risk involved. It's just like love. Love never comes without a certain element of risk. Risk of what? Betrayal. It not being reciprocated back. Abandonment. Abuse of your love. Being taken advantage of. That's all a possibility with anyone that you love. But ain't it sad that people will throw all their love into a dog that's going to die in 10 years? But they won't do it with people. They don't do it with their children or their parents or their people they go to church with. No. And then as soon as that dog dies, they'll get another one and start it all and do it all over again. But not with folks. It's sad. Be of the same mind. He said, let me read. Verse 16, be of the same mind, one toward another. It's not just a part of your, you know how churches have a covenant, like a church covenant. It used to be on the walls of church, but it was just a decoration. Nobody really used it as a map, you know, like a guideline or whatever for their life concerning the relationship they had with their brethren in the church. But a lot of people do that same ideology with things like this about their own life. They will they'll feel like they are of the same mind, but it's just like an inner dialogue thing that they tell themselves. But it says, be of the same mind, one toward another. So obviously it's something we have to practice and towards one another. Not just in the quiet space of our mind to make us feel better about, you know, that I am that. Well, do you do that though? So be of the same mind, one toward another. It's an action. It's visible. It's noticeable. And not just by the person you're doing it to, but it's noticeable by others as well. It is. One more thing I wanted to say about the rejoicing and weeping. He just said, rejoice with them that do rejoice and weep with them that weep. That's the only two emotions that he asked us to participate in with others. Was that the only two emotions? No. He didn't say anything about anger or fear or anxiety or panic or stress or any of those things. He didn't say, be angry with those that are angry. Be afraid with those who are afraid. No. But rejoicing and weeping are the two that need a companion. You know, weeping, it's easier to see why somebody would need companionship when you're sorrowful. But you need that when you rejoice too. Ain't that what weddings are supposed to be about? Rejoicing? There's other cultures and other even religions that get a lot more excited and happy about a wedding than we do. Are you aware of that? I mean, it's supposed to be a joyous occasion. Jesus went to weddings, more than one. He liked them. Why? They were a joyous occasion. And it begged companionship. It begged rejoicing with them. You know? This is worthy to mention too. Many times you'll see people weeping or being overly emotional about things that are not founded in truth or reality. There's a lot of sorrow people just live in that really is pretty resolvable. Just as overwhelmed them. And from the outside looking in, you can look at it and say, wow, you know, you're really letting this get you down. I mean, all you'd have to do is just move this there and move that back over there, and it would solve your problem. But most people look at it, say that to themselves, shake their head and say, that guy is ridiculous. And then they move on about their day. You know, an issue that I have seen, and I've even said these things myself, but I feel like I've been wrong about it. Something that's very common and very visible, and it's homelessness. You know, there is, a major epidemic of homelessness in our country, this land of plenty. But there's people that live on the street and have for years, decades. And a lot of people die on the streets too. And it's just this ugly side of our culture that the way our culture is designed, it just keeps it hidden. It's just off in the wings. So and hey, everybody, look at this, look at this, look at this, and we don't look at that. And the only time you really see them is when they're panhandling at a stoplight, or you see them camped out behind a building somewhere or whatever. And most people, their knee-jerk reaction is, why do they want to live like that? All you got to do, there's plenty of work to be had. Just get a job. Well, talk to a few of them. Just talk to a few of them. They are overwhelmed. There are challenges. You can't get a job unless you have an address. Do you know that? And most places will not hire you unless you have a physical address where you live. Well, that's hard to do when you live in a tent by the river or behind Walmart or wherever it is. Well, that stops you right there in your tracks. How are you going to get to work? You got a valid driver's license? A lot of them don't. And obviously most of them don't have a vehicle. So how are they going to get to work? Well, there's another challenge. And these things stack up quick and it overwhelms them. And it's a major feeling of hopelessness, and it's impossible to fix. And I don't know. You might not be able to go give them a job, okay? Do you have time or the ability in your life to run a bus route for folks every morning that are homeless, to go pick them up, take them to work? Well, very rare is the occasion where somebody has that ability to do that. But more often than not, what people need first is a compassionate response. Instead of looking at them and just being like, get out of the way. Go get a job, you bum. Even though a tear-filled response may not be what they need, a compassionate response to their sorrow or their anxiety or whatever it is, it might be the calm that they need to help them recenter and ground back to reality. You can look at their situation and say, man, that's pretty fixable. It's just a couple of moves that would have to be made, and then you be back on your feet. But they're not seeing that. They're just seeing the waves crashing down. And maybe all they need from you or I is just an arm around them and say, hey, man, I see you. I see where you're at. And look, I'm going to help you. Here's what you need to do. And I'll come pick you up, and I'll do this. There's people that do that. There's people that make a difference in other people's lives that way. But we got our own problems, don't we? And they take up all of our time and all of our resources, and even the thought of that, it's noble. We think of that or hear about that and we're like, man, that's a good deal. That's a good deal that somebody's doing that for them people. But we could do more than we do. We could. I could do more than I do. You just got to put yourself out there. And not many people do that. I don't do it as much as I could. Just to talk to somebody in the store. You'd be amazed at how many people will talk your leg off in the grocery store that you don't even know. But if you talk to them, they'll talk to you. People are lonesome and alone, very alone. So the reality they're living in is not reality, but you could help them back to reality just by weeping with them when they weep, rejoicing with them when they rejoice, having that attitude towards it. Let's see, catch back up with my my notes. You know, I'll say this about it. People who try to tough love somebody that's down on their luck, most of the time the only response they're going to get out of them is anger. And how productive is that? You know, if you try to shame them because of their circumstance into, motivating them to pull themselves up out of it, that usually don't work. It don't work with your kids. Why would it work with a stranger that don't know you? You can't just humiliate a child until they do right for not doing right, or cleaning their room. I mean, you can call them names and everything else for having a dirty room, and it's not really going to motivate them to keep their room clean or be a different, adopt a different standard of living. And it doesn't for people either. It doesn't work for you, If every time I seen you, I just pointed out, some booger on your shirt or, hey, your kid threw up on your dress or what. I just always pointed out the thing that you're going to be like, oh, no. You're going to dread seeing me coming your way, But I know people that literally, they try to build others up. And it don't matter who they are. They could smell like a gym sock, but they'll say something nice about their shirt or their jewelry or whatever because they just want to lift up others. Man, that's what it's all about. You start doing that and it'll start coming back to you too, Anyway. And then he moves on here, and we'll cover this last part, we'll be done. But he says, mind not high things. Well, that sounds a little bit confusing at first glance there, because what are high things? Well, understand this. High things, it's not the same here as things above. Where he says, set your affections on things above, not on things of this earth. That's not what he's talking about when he refers to high things. What he's talking about is the high and haughty look and the pride of life. The pursuit, the relentless, endless, insatiable pursuit that most everyone is involved in trying to get more, bigger, better, stronger, all that stuff. It's high things. You ever live around short people? There's a lot of things in short people's lives that's too high for them to reach. And everything that's up high, they got to reach it, and it's a struggle. So they got to have step stools and ladders and help and all that kind of stuff. It makes things difficult. A lot of things that are high things, you're never going to get. They're unattainable. It seems to me, I remember being young and having a kind of a silent admiration for people who came from poverty and did real well in life, and then they had wealth and success and made something out of themselves. But it ain't ever enough. You ever notice that about folks? I mean, it's never enough. Never, ever enough. And it can tend to ruin their life. They just become laser focused on more. When is enough enough? Well, that's what somebody said. I heard a guy asking a guy, same thing. It was on a podcast, and he was an entrepreneur. He'd had many businesses and restaurants and all this stuff. And he said, the guy doing the interview asked the man the question. He said, let's see if I can remember how he said it. He said, what is your favorite project that you've ever done? And he said, the next one. That was his answer. The next one. But what about all the ones you've done? Yeah, but the next one. There's people that will hear that and be like, there you go. That's drive right there. That's the drive you got to have if that man ain't never going to be happy. And in the process of all that, you drive away all the people that are real in your life. You drive them away. And so mind not high things. You know, if the Lord wills it for you to have wealth, then receive it with gladness. Okay, possess it with dignity and honor, and be a good steward of that. But I'm not in that category, and most people aren't. You're just living. So if all you ever dream about is the things that you don't have, or that you very possibly might never have, then what are you doing with what you have now? Are you being a good steward of it? Are you appreciating what you have? No, you're just discontent with it constantly. There ain't nothing more miserable than being around somebody who is always discontent. It's miserable. Those people are lonely because no one wants to be around the Debbie Downer. That's where they are. Ain't nothing ever good enough. You know, glass half empty kind of people, if you know what I mean. So, mind not high things. Okay? We all have the tendency to do two particular things when it concerns this matter. We compare ourselves to one another, which he told us not to do, for this reason. But we compare ourselves to other people, and then we find all kinds of reasons why we're either going to have that or we're already better than that. And that's minding high things. And that's why the second part of that sentence is there. But condescend to men of low estate. You know, Dad's always talking about, referring to English words, and because you know Spanish, it adds a different context to the understanding of the word. Con in English is like against. It has a negative connotation of being like contrary, pros and cons, like the negative side. But the word con, C-O-N, in Spanish means with. With. So, okay, well, if you look at that root of that word, condescend, what's he telling us to do? He said, mind not high things, because first of all, you're not up there, really. But you'll find people that you're at a higher station in life than they are in their current condition. He said, go down there, descend off of your high spot, down there with them. How are you going to weep with them that are weeping if you don't go down there to where they're weeping? Jesus must needs go through Samaria. Why? Well, because the Samaritans didn't come to where he was at that, when he said that. They didn't go there. Nor did the Jews go down there where they were. But he needed to go there, he said. Why? Because there was a woman at a well. And he had to help her. He had to give her living water. And that's what we can do. If we'll just condescend to men of low estate. Go down to where they're at. Why do we have to condescend? Because we all self-elevate. It may not be as far of a trip to condescend to men of low estate as what you think it will be. There's a lot more similarities between me and that guy than what I think there is. You start talking to them, guess what? They're just like me. Matter of fact, I'm only one or two bad decisions away from being in the same state that he's in. I'm 2 decent paychecks away from being homeless too. And so are you, if you think about it. I mean, most people who wind up in a bad situation, it didn't happen over the period of a decade. It happened real quick. So, condescend to men of low estate. We all purposely seek out people who we secretly feel are above us. Really, you ever thought about that? But for the reasons that we might be able to gain some elevation from them. You ever notice that? That's why he didn't say go hang out with rich people. You are. Let's see, what's that saying? Show me your friends, I'll show you who you are. Well, that applies in some ways, but not in all ways. Just because you hang out with rich people don't mean you're rich, right? Yeah. It's the same way here. Condescend, come down with them. And then the last part of that verse says this, be not wise in your own conceit. Well, we think, with that word gets used in our language now, in our culture, as, someone who is conceited. What do you think when you think that word? He's conceited. She's conceited. What, she thinks she's prettier than everybody else? I guess he thinks he's smarter than everyone else. He's always right. This and that and the other. Conceit. Conceit, if you look it up, this is what it means. Conceit means an opinion. It's an opinion. It's your opinion. A notion, which is stepping away from even, opinion where it could have the possibility to be right. Well, it's also a notion. Well, what's a notion? Well, he took a notion to go somewhere. Why? Nobody knows. He just took a notion. It's a notion. Conceit. It has to do with what you think. What you think. What you think about everything. Yourself, pop culture, politics, so on and so forth. It's a fancy. Conceit is just a fancy. You notice the trend, how we're trending away from reality here in these definitions of this word? The next one is imagination. Conceit is imagination. It's a striking thought. It's an unnatural conception. You see how it just walked completely away from reality? Because that's the progression of the downward spiral of conceit. And he said, be not wise in your own conceit. Well, I don't have conceit. Oh, yeah, you do. Everybody does. Everybody has it. He said, don't base what you think is wisdom in that. Because there's another scripture, Proverbs 26:12 says this, seest thou a man wise in his own conceit? There is more hope of a fool than of him. Be not wise in your own conceit. Why? Because it's going to affect how you treat people. It's going to affect how you see yourself. It's going to affect how you will interact with other people. It's going to affect how you will either rejoice or weep with them that are doing that or not. And it all is going to circle back to your own conceit, your opinion of yourself, how you see you, how I see me. For lack of a better way to put it, you're just too good to do that. That's kind of not my thing. Well, there's a lot of things that people get real comfortable in not being their thing. And we ought to step outside of that sometimes. The Lord Jesus, in his ministry here on this earth, pretty much everything he did was uncomfortable. I mean, he didn't even have a place to lay his head, so sleep wasn't even comfortable, really. And then the situations that he on purpose put himself in. You think that when those multitudes followed him around that he didn't know they were hungry? Well, no, he did. And he did something about it. What about all the other things that he found himself? Do you think it was a pleasant Sabbath to go to the temple for Jesus and face the Pharisees? And the Bible don't say everything that went on moment by moment in the 3 years of his ministry. There's a lot more things went on. Everything he did was probably outside of a comfort zone of somebody. The disciples were a lot more ready to voice that than he ever was. So yeah, and it ought to be that way for us. We ought to have a heart for others and understand that we're going to have to step outside of our comfort zone to do these things. So rejoice, fill your station with joy, okay? We all have one. And so rejoice with them that rejoice and weep with them that weep. Amen.